If you watched my last video, you saw that mundane astrology predicted exactly where we are at today with our economic situation, with our leaders, with our allies starting to leave us, with the stock market plunging. And now we have civil unrest, which has also been predicted back in my February mundane astrology predictions based off the Aries ingress in the equinox. So what we're going to do today is look at where this continues based on the summer solstice when the sun moves into Cancer and we get the next phase of the cycle. Medieval predictive mundane astrology is especially based on every 3 months when the sun enters either its equinox or its solstice point. The last time the sun entered Aries, that was an equinox point. Now we're entering Cancer, which is going to be a solstice point. And this is going to set the tone for the next 3 months. Where is this all headed? So I'm going to show you what I'm looking at on the screen now to give you the methodology of how this works and some of my predictions based on the medieval astrology. So the main factor is always going to be the rising sign. This is going to indicate the person asking the question or the primary focus. So this chart is based in Washington, D.C. on June 20th, at the exact time the sun moves into Cancer, which is the summer solstice. Aquarius is rising. So there's nothing really happening in Aquarius. What we have to do then is look at the ruler. So we look at Saturn. Saturn is going to be the indicator here of government. It's going to be the indicator of specifically elderly people in government. Saturn's always going to be a little bit old. It's going to be dictatorial. It's going to be a little bit brazen because it may feel suppressive to some people. And this is going on in the third house in its fall of Aries. So that's a whole nother story in itself, right? Aries, when Saturn is in Aries, this creates pressure. This creates pressure on the individual. Aries is a sign of the individual. It's the sign of the person. It's the sign of our struggle to become independent. And Saturn is putting real pressure on that. It's taking away some of our freedom, taking away some of our independence. It's putting more pressure on us right now. And Saturn here is also square the sun. And the sun is going to be the natural indicator of government, of the king specifically in medieval astrology, which in today's terms would basically be the president. We have Saturn here squaring the sun. And since the sun is also the exaltation ruler of Aries, and we just had an Aries eclipse, this is essentially the illness, the detriment of a king or of a ruler. So what do I see here? I see weakened, I see ineffective leadership, especially because these are decline houses. Saturn in the third house is a decline house. In mundane astrology, the third, the ninth, the sixth, and the 12th, these are decline houses. These are weaker houses. All right, especially in mundane astrology. In normal natal predictive astrology, the third house may not be considered as weak. I've had to explain this to people, but in mundane traditional astrology, the third house is absolutely weak. And this is connecting to the sixth house. So the sun and Saturn, this is pressure. And it's pressure that's amplified because Saturn is obviously in its fall in Aries. It's not very happy in Aries. The sun is happy in Cancer, but it's in the sixth house, very weak. And we have a very weak Saturn, which is the indicator of that first house, which is our question. What's going to happen with the United States government this year? That's our primary question. So this is essentially a functionally impaired government. This is a government that lacks coherence. This is a government that tries very hard to implement policies. They may face a lot of resistance. They may resort to backhanded measures. The sun is especially indicative of a declining confidence in leadership when it's being squared to Saturn. So at least temporarily. I'm not saying continuously. I'm going to get to that towards the end of this video. But for the first month, maybe even month and a half, we see the leadership as very ineffective. We see leadership as overreaching their boundaries. This can create some fear. This can spark realities that are difficult, that are more challenging. And it may be planned. That's what I'm going to be getting at, especially because I'm going to show you where Mars is at in this whole scenario. So I feel that some of this may be planned. It's kind of like controlled chaos. So it's not all out chaos. We have very controlled chaos. And since Saturn is also conjunct Neptune in this chart, that's another story. You know, this is a ruler that's trying very hard. However, the system is blocking them. So I do see a lot of legal challenges coming here, which is also going to be amplified in an interpretation based off Jupiter, which I'm going to show you in another minute as well. But there is, you know, lies, a lot of lies when we have Saturn and Neptune. Neptune's going to be a planet of confusion. It's going to be a planet of lies here with Saturn. This is a planet where when these guys come together, you may see media problems. You may see blatant propaganda coming out more, especially on the government side. Saturn is going to represent a very authoritative government here, especially when it's in Aries. Saturn, again, is not overly happy in Aries. It kind of acts very poorly to get its way. So this can be problems between federal, state, local communications and governments where they're not talking, they're not getting along. There is blatant just misinformation happening from all sides. Now, with the Sun and Jupiter in the 6th house, and again, the Sun is always going to represent the king in a mundane reading in general, just the most planetary, it's the planet most indicative of being a ruler. So we do have a president here because this is conjunct Jupiter. The government itself, especially the president, they believe that they are acting justly. They believe that they are acting for the benefit of all people here, especially involving immigration enforcement, things of that nature. However, the chaos that a lot of this sparks and the overreach that a lot of this takes on and the kind of incoherence to the whole thing amplified by Saturn and Neptune, again, we see a lot of lies. We see a lot of nonsense. We see a lot of misdirection. We see propaganda on a few different angles. So all of this kind of gets amplified for the first month and a half. And then that Sun touches Jupiter. So that's when things will go a lot smoother. We will see things to even out a little bit more. There will probably be legal actions. I feel like a lot of this is going to get balanced out legally. So we're not going to see all out chaos past July. All right. Into August, this should mostly be starting to settle down. And then by the end of August, when we're moving towards the Libra equinox, it should be mostly coming to an end. So I do, again, this is something that seems to be happening hot and fast. We're already starting to get into the thick of it, which was predicted in my last mundane video. And another big thing with this is going to be the moon and Venus in the 4th here. So we have an exalted moon, and the moon is going to be a secondary ruler of any mundane chart. So this is in the 4th house, and this is also co-present with Venus. We have an exalted moon, we have Venus in domicile. These guys are very happy. And the moon is in a good aspect with the Sun and Jupiter. And we have Venus in a good aspect with Mercury. We also have the moon trine Mars. Now, first, let's talk about what the moon and Venus are going to mean in the 4th house in general for this. This talks about a population that comes together, especially domestically. Taurus is an earth sign. It's very much rooted in nature and in agriculture and in people and their homes and people coming together and helping each other. So I see a lot, you know, even though the government may be taking steps here, there can be instances of overreach. I feel like the people in this scenario really come together and they really want to help each other. So no matter what side of the aisle you're on here, you know, if you're on one side of the aisle where you're supporting, you know, your fellows, people that are being deported, right? Maybe you're supporting them. Maybe you're on the left. This is really a good sign for those people to come together. They're very helping of each other. They're not taking actions that are belligerent. They're actually going to be more peaceful. So I feel like what's going on is kind of a bump in the road. This really settles down and it becomes a lot more peaceful. And this may move into a more helpful legal type process. And then with the moon trining Mars, you know, this is reactive, but it's very disciplined in its reactiveness. So this is an emotional time. This points to politicians that rile up the people. This points to a people's coalition coming together, a populist movement. Now, if you're on the right side of the aisle, this can point to nationalism. This points to more pride in your country. So this, again, this points to people and coalitions coming together on both sides. So I do feel like it's going to calm down. There is going to be some kind of legal agreement eventually reached here. Even though the government is pushing very hard, I feel like the pushback from the people, because the moon represents the people. The moon represents the people around you. This is amplified because the moon is in Taurus. It's exalted here. So this represents your community, the people around you, the people that you're talking to every day, the people on the street, and your home life, right? Your families. That's all amplified because this is in Taurus. So this is trine Mars. This points to people coming together to fight for common causes. And we have Venus in Taurus. So people are very protective. They're very much caring for their neighbors right now. So no matter what side of the aisle you're on, you're going to be supportive of your cause, right? And this is amplified by that. This is very much amplified. But I do see this more of as a populist uprising. Very populist, very localized. So this may be a state-by-state basis, such as, in California right now, we see people really coming together to fight off the federal government. In other areas, if you're on the right here, we see the moon Mars as well. So this can be people actually coming in to support the federal government. So I feel like the populist movements on both sides are going to rise, which is generally not a good omen for the long term. But in the short term, this seems to work out based on this chart. Now, Mars, this is another story. And I'm going to get more into Mars because this is where I feel like some of the fear comes in. This can be military. This can be police activity. So all these things are going to be picked up as well because we have Mars in the 8th house. So Mars in the 8th house, again, fear. This can be military. This can be excessive policing. This can relate to taxes, high prices, even deaths or endings. But again, the Mars is in a relatively good aspect with the moon. It's also in a good aspect with Sun and Jupiter here. We have a sextile there. So this is very strategic. This is controlled force. This can be more defensive on both sides. I feel like, again, because of all the populism in this chart, this is really pointing to localized police forces. So I feel like at the national level, it may be very incoherent. They may be pressing very hard. But ultimately, the states start to get things back under control here, and things become a little more strategic, right? Now, it can be militarized force as well. There can be some instances of militarization, such as, again, National Guard deployments, which we're seeing now, ICE raids, which we're seeing now. But I feel like this is going to be very surgical, and I don't feel like this is going to end up spiraling out of control based off of this, because of all of the other good aspects. We have sextiles with Sun and Jupiter. We have that trine with the moon. So again, this does help to stabilize things. And I feel like because of that Venus, which is in its home in Taurus, we have the moon exalted in Taurus, this brings people together. This brings more peaceful kinds of protests. This brings more legal actions. This brings people helping each other, neighborhood mutual aid, even local officials coming together. So not necessarily working against the federal government, but not giving them ammunition either. Because I feel like with the Saturn-Neptune aspect here, again, there's a lot of deception happening in the air right now. I saw this same thing during the COVID nonsense. Saturn was Neptune. All the astrologers were saying, oh, that's because of the disease. No, it was because of the propaganda that was going on around it. It was propaganda. Hordes and hordes of it. So if you fall into the propaganda, you tend to play into an authoritarian regime's control, don't you? This goes on constantly throughout history, which I'm going to show you towards the end of this video as well. But again, I feel like based off the reaction from the people here, there is a lot of coming together, and this won't get too out of control right now. So the overall theme here, again, we do see a leadership crisis where they are weakened. Maybe they're using excess propaganda. There can be overreach here. There can be very real opposition starting to pop up politically. So your political party may start to crumble from the inside, and the opposition parties can start to rise a little bit. So I feel like now the people aren't going to fall into it, and I do feel like this is going to get under control relatively quickly. And there probably is going to be some legal and judicial pushback because we have Jupiter exalted. It's conjunct the sun as well, and it's an aspect with Mars. So the courts will tend to come out with this particular aspect. Jupiter is going to represent good and just laws. So Jupiter is temporarily squared by the sun, but it's separating from that aspect. So I feel like justice tends to return with this. The courts take their authority back, and we're going to see law and order come back on both ends, right? So I feel like, again, riots, things like that will not last that long. They will be strategically put down, but at the same time, the people are going to really band together, which is a good thing, right? Because you don't want chaos devolving. You don't want to end up with tanks on the street and you have a Soviet situation, right? The process of normalization, if you've ever heard of that, problem, reaction, solution, you know, they want to cause chaos because then they can overreach. So I don't feel like this collapses into any kind of escalation. I feel like the federal and local tensions will ultimately get resolved in the courts, which is going to be a good thing. Now, there's likely going to be some kind of a compromise with all of this. And remember, though, that the Sun and Saturn are both cadent, so they are struggling. They're struggling internally as well. That's what people have to realize. While the government is doing all this, and while they're sending, you know, troops out, and they're doing these deportations, and they're doing all these kinds of things, and they're doing tariffs that have been ineffective, which I predicted in my last video. You know, they're having internal problems as well. So I feel like all this does is it plays into that Aries eclipse that we had, which in traditional astrology, it always represented a problem with the ruler. You know, either a literal physical problem or some kind of a challenge from another player, or even internally they're betrayed. So this can go a lot of different ways, and that's really going to come out in 2026, because once we see Saturn hit 8 degrees Aries, once the Saturn retrograde ends in 2026 and it's more fully in Aries, that's when real challenges are going to come to the leadership. So you may start seeing some interesting things around that time. You'll have to check back in with me because I have a few ideas of where that's going, but I want to get a little bit more in depth for you in a whole nother video. So, you know, again, I feel like there's going to be some stability, but Uranus is also changing signs here too. Uranus is going to be changing signs in July and moving into Gemini, which it has not been in for a very long time. So, you know, again, technologically and for communication, again, I feel like we're going to see a lot of advancements in AI. We're going to start seeing incredible things in the way of technology over the next 7-8 years. This can be used by government for negative things, obviously, but I feel like this can also be used for the politics. Right? Now, here's some historic parallels, which I found very interesting. So Saturn in Aries and Uranus in Gemini, these are some of the historic parallels I was looking at. So from 96 to 99, Saturn in Aries, we had a lot of technological growth. This was the rise of the internet. But we also had the dot-com boom. We had a lot of fraud. We had a lot of nonsense. We had a lot of people pumping penny stocks, just, you know, with some guy in his garage, and they'd say this is the next big tech revolution. So things started to fall apart there. We had earlier than that, another Saturn in Aries was the social upheaval of the 60s, right? We had a lot of anti-war protests, which again, we're kind of seeing a similar theme today with the protests. And we also had political assassinations, and we had a lot of unrest. So again, I feel like there are big changes in the air. Now, again, another one, prelude to World War II. Everyone knows what was going on then. We had a lot of nationalism for on all sides. Like we had American nationalism, you know, people united to fight the war effort, but we had nationalism from, you know, the Nazi Germans as well, and Japan, and all these, you know, Allied powers and Axis powers. They were all very nationalistic, but then very conflicted times obviously followed that. There was a lot of military buildup. There was a lot of technological advances during the time. Another one, Uranus and Gemini. This was 1941 to 49. So this was, again, we had those World War II technologies come out. A lot of this was unseen. We had like Werner von Braun building rockets. We had, all these Nazi advancements. We had American advancements. We had, the bombs being built. It was the atomic age. So there was a lot going on there, but there was also a lot of global conflict. Another time Uranus was in Gemini, the American Civil War. Before that, we had a lot of divisiveness. We had brothers fighting brothers. So revolutionary changes in government, very, very common. But also a lot of new technologies came out of that era. Unfortunately, that's the way humanity progresses, right? We fight wars, and that's how we end up building technologies. For better or for worse, shape our lives. So I feel like for this quarter, yes, because of the Saturn square Jupiter and Saturn square Sun, there are still going to be financial pressures. That obviously started. I talked about that in my last video for the Aries ingress, for the equinox. So I feel like that's going to continue on. Debts, prices, they're going to continue up higher. Taxation issues, people are going to be very upset about that. So I feel, again, more in 2026. I'll get to this in a whole nother video, but when this comes around, this is when we're going to start seeing real challenges to leadership. And this is, historically how human beings operate. So am I saying there's going to be an all-out war in a few years? No, but I'm saying that we are definitely moving closer to this kind of disconjointed entity instead of the united states that we have been living in. And it's been going on for a while. I feel like, again, we're just building to this climax. And again, with Mars being the way it is, there is police reaction, there is military reaction, especially because this is all in the 8th house. But since we have that moon trine, I feel like the people kind of come together. There is this swift community response. So it's de-escalated in a way that isn't going to be detrimental in the long run, which is good. So we may find this handed over more to local matters instead of being a national military response. And I feel like with the Mars Jupiter aspect and Mars Sun aspect, this can be taken care of in the courts more. So that may de-escalate things as well, ultimately. And then again, I've gone through some of these historical parallels for you. So again, government is very weak right now, but they're also being very assertive. The Saturn square Sun aspect tends to be government authoritativeness, government overreach, disorganization. There can be unclear messaging, especially with Neptune. There could be blatant propaganda. So public sentiment, however, is going to be very oriented toward local matters, local pride, states' rights, that kind of thing. So I feel like the states may come out, they may band together in some way to legally, for now, try to tamper down some of this with perceived overreaches that are happening. So the overall theme here is we have this whole quarter marked by a constraint. There's a lot of local resistance. There's a lot of ideological escalations. There's people banding together locally to really come together on both sides here to take care of their people and to fight for their beliefs, especially with that Mars trine. And with this Uranus move, this is going to be very ideological. This is an ideological fight. Hopefully it doesn't break out hot, which I'll get into. It's possible, but that won't be for down the road. But there is this ideological persistence on both sides with their raison d'etre. They're both trying to succeed and be the one left standing. So that's a basic outlook of medieval mundane astrology for the next quarter. I could have even got a little bit more in depth in this, but it probably would have taken me over an hour because I could have got into all of the rulerships on what's ruling what sign and this and that. There's a lot of interpretations you can make with this, but I wanted to go with the most prominent aspects so I can give you guys a good interpretation of what is coming down the pipe for the next few months and where things are headed. So leave a comment. Let me know how I did and what you guys think of medieval predictive astrology and traditional astrology and what you guys want me to talk about next. Hope you all have a great summer, and I will see you all later. Bye.